Kurt Vonnegut was known for his science fiction novels and his interesting life. In fact, Vonnegut's life was so interesting that he often wondered why no one had bothered to write a biography about him. Kurt Vonnegut Jr. was born in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1922 to his father, Kurt Vonnegut Sr., and his mother, Edith Lieber Vonnegut. Vonnegut was raised in a very wealthy household because his father was a well-paid architect and also because his mother was an heiress of a wealthy fortune. As a child, Vonnegut was very bright and clever. He always felt that his older brother, Bernard, was the favorite child of his parents, and he often felt that his parents didn't love him. When he was a young teenager, Vonnegut found out from Bernard that he was conceived by his parents on accident. Since that moment, Vonnegut's life philosophy was that everything in life was accidental. While Vonnegut was in high school, he discovered that he was a very good writer. Young Vonnegut could not understand why he was the only seemingly good writer in his school. After graduating from high school in 1940, Vonnegut studied chemistry at Cornell University. Vonnegut planned on going to Cornell as an English major, but his father, Bernard, advised against it. His grades suffered at Cornell. Vonnegut enlisted in the United States Army, and he was then transferred to Carnegie Mellon University to study engineering. Vonnegut had considered dropping out of college, but he realized that dropping out would have simply made him eligible for the draft, so he saved the government the trouble of drafting him by enlisting in the Army. A majority of his family was not happy with his decision. However, his father thought it might teach him how to be neat. Vonnegut wanted to surprise his family by returning home for Mother's Day in 1944. However, his happy visit took a turn for the worse when his mother committed suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills. Vonnegut figured that she committed suicide because she was angry at him. After this event, he started to show signs of depression. Vonnegut left home and went back to Germany to fulfill his duties in the army. In December of 1944, he was captured by the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge, and he, along with many other soldiers, were shuffled onto trains and transported to a prison camp. When the new year came around, Vonnegut thought that he was going to be in this prison camp forever. But he was transferred to Dresden to help unload boxes of grain in Schlachthaus at a German slaughterhouse. The living conditions were not good, but they were better than what he endured in the prison camp. On February 13, 1945, the firebombing of Dresden began, an event which Vonnegut would later state as having been the most important moment of his entire life. He and the other prisoners took shelter in a tightly sealed refrigerator beneath the slaughterhouse, which kept them all alive. After the bombing stopped, Vonnegut helped clean up all the dead bodies and disposed of them. This had a traumatizing effect on Vonnegut, and he was never the same again. His children said that he most likely suffered from an undiagnosed form of post-traumatic stress disorder, because he always had a haunted look in his eye. He was sent home from the war in 1944 with a Purple Heart due to frostbite. He ended up marrying his childhood sweetheart, Jane Marie Cox, after he came home from the war, and they had 3 children together. After Vonnegut's sister, Alice, and her husband tragically died, Vonnegut and his wife took in their 4 kids. Since high school, Vonnegut had always wanted to do something big. After experiencing the bombing of Dresden, he wanted to write a book about that event. However, he had one issue. He did not see the bombing of Dresden. He only heard it from down in the refrigerator. While working at General Electric, he was also a freelance writer. He was a little discouraged by the many rejection letters he received for his Dresden book, but he kept writing. After receiving his big break when a magazine gave him $750 for one of his stories, he quit his job at General Electric to pursue writing. He never liked his job at the magazine, though, because he could not write any of the risky fiction that he enjoyed. He could only write what he called miserable crap. When television took over the magazine business in the 1950s, Vonnegut had to work constantly in order to support his large family. In 1965, he got a job teaching at Iowa State University, and this is where he taught and influenced major writers such as John Irving and David Milch. This is when he realized that his book about Dresden didn't need to be written in chronological order. In 1967, he finally published what became his most famous novel, Slaughterhouse-Five. This book was based mainly on his experiences as a prisoner of war during World War II. This novel follows Billy Pilgrim, a PTSD sufferer, and his crazy time-traveling life following his experiences as a prisoner of war during World War II. Vonnegut continued to write more crazy science fiction novels throughout the 1970s, and he changed his name by dropping the Junior. His name started to go to his head, and in 1970, he left Jane and his kids and went to New York City, where he met a woman who was much younger than he was. Despite the fact that he left Jane, he never actually divorced her. His novels in the 1980s started to become more biographical than fictional. His collection of essays, A Man Without a Country, expressed his views on politics. Vonnegut published his last novel, Timequake, in 1997, and then announced that he was retiring from writing. On April 11, 2007, Vonnegut was killed when he tripped over his dog's leash when he was walking down the stairs of his apartment complex. This is almost exactly how he predicted that he would die in a letter that he wrote to his wife 5 months before. Throughout his writing career, Vonnegut wrote about 14 novels and many short stories, plays, and essays. Kurt Vonnegut's writings were mostly very dark in theme, and they also take place in the postmodern world era. For example, Vonnegut's first short story, Welcome to the Monkey House, is about a man who has to choose which people will die in order for his son to be born. Another one of his short stories, Harrison Bergeron, is about a world where no one can be different from one another. Despite Vonnegut's dark themes, he wrote with a very humoristic tone. He made dark themes funny. Kurt Vonnegut's writing style is much different than typical authors of the time. Most of his books were of the science fiction genre so that he could throw in some of his opinions about the world without being too offensive. He was a very satirical writer. Many of his novels made fun of situations going on with the United States government. For example, he writes in Breakfast of Champions that Vietnam is a country where America is trying to make people stop being communists by dropping things on them from airplanes. Vonnegut is writing in both of the perspectives of Kilgore Trout and Wayne Hoover, who live in the future. This famous book also was written close to the end of the Vietnam War, so Vonnegut was poking more fun at America's involvement in Vietnam than anything. Vonnegut's works are also riddled with his own views about religion. Vonnegut came from a family of freethinkers, were basically people who do not believe in God. Vonnegut felt that anyone who thinks he sees what God is doing were fools. Many of his books consist of characters who have very atheist-like views of the world, such as Billy Pilgrim and Slaughterhouse Five. He was also a pacifist and a large believer in the socialist movement, and these themes are projected throughout his novels. The structure of Vonnegut's novels varied from the simple structure of Cat's Cradle to the very complex style of Slaughterhouse Five.
Well, there's no reason why the simple shapes of stories can't be fed into computers. They are beautiful shapes. This is the GI axis, good fortune, ill fortune. Sickness and poverty down here, wealth and boisterous good health up there. Here's the very middle. Now, this is the BE axis. B stands for beginning. E stands for electricity. Now, this is an exercise in relativity, really, is the shape of the curves of what matters and not their origins. So we'll start a little above average, is why get a depressing person? We'll start the whole thing. We call this story Man in Hole, but it needn't be about a man, and it needn't be about somebody getting into a hole. But it's just a good way to remember it. Somebody gets into trouble, gets out of it again. People love that story. They never get sick of it. All right, not copyrighted. Another story, also a beautiful curve and easily fed into a computer, called Boy Gets Girl, but it needn't be that. Just a way to remember it. Start on an average day, average person, not expecting anything to happen a day like any other. Finds something wonderful, just loves it. Oh, God damn it. Got it back again. People like that. Now, these are beautiful curves, and this gets a little complicated. Computers can now play chess, so I don't know why they can't digest this very difficult curve I'm going to draw for you now. And it so happens that this is the most popular story in our civilization, Western civilization. As we love to hear this story, every time it's retold, somebody makes another $1 million. You're welcome to do it. Now, surprisingly enough, I've said it's depressing. You know, people don't like stories about below average days and people. But we're going to start way down here. Worse than that, who is so low? It's a little girl. What's happened? Her mother has died. Her father has remarried a vile-tempered, ugly woman with two nasty daughters, big daughters. You've heard it. See? Anyway, there's a party at the palace that night. She can't go. She has to help everybody else get ready. She has to stay home. Now, does she sink lower? No. She's a staunch little girl, and she has had the maximum whack from fate, which is the loss of her mother. She can't go any lower than that. Okay, so the fairy godmother comes. Gives her shoes, gives her stocking, gives her mascara. Gives her means of transportation. Goes to the party. Dances with the prince, has a swell time. Boring, 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 boring. Now, there's a slight inclination to that line as I've drawn it because it takes perhaps 20 seconds, 30 seconds for a grandfather clock to strike 12. Does she wind up at the same level? Of course not. She will remember that dance for the rest of her life. Now, she poops along on this level till the prince comes, the shoe fits. She achieves off-scale happiness.
Vonnegut was also known for using his characters in many of his works. For example, Kilgore Trout is one of the protagonists of Breakfast of Champions. For Breakfast of Champions, Vonnegut used Kilgore Trout for the first time in Slaughterhouse-Five as an author that had Elliot Rosewater in a daze. Slaughterhouse-Five was not Elliot Rosewater's only appearance. He also is briefly mentioned in Breakfast of Champions and is also the main character in Vonnegut's novel, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. Vonnegut also illustrated his own novels using crude illustrations that he drew with a felt-tip pen. Vonnegut had some weird quirks when it came to writing. He always had to write by the light of his red rooster lamp and always used a typewriter because he enjoyed the tactile feeling of it. He also refused to use semicolons in writing because he felt like they should only be used by people who went to college. Vonnegut had very mixed reviews of his novels. Some people really enjoyed his works. For instance, some people viewed Slaughterhouse-Five as very tough and very funny. It is sad and delightful, and it works. Others found Breakfast of Champions to be complex magic. Also, since Billy Pilgrim was written to show signs of PTSD, Slaughterhouse-Five grabbed the nation's attention because people wanted to know what they could do to help those suffering from mental trauma. Vonnegut became so famous that people wanted him to star in commercials, as he could have sold anything under his name. He became so famous that people even broke into his house. Due to his popularity, he was also made an honorary member of the Humanist Foundation, and an asteroid is named after him, which is the 25399 Vonnegut. In February 1976, Vonnegut received sympathy cards in the mail, even though no one had died. Later, he realized that February 13, 1976, was the day that Billy Pilgrim died in Slaughterhouse-Five. Despite being so popular, Kurt Vonnegut received a lot of criticism. Due to Slaughterhouse-Five's vulgarness, its anti-Christianity themes, and its violence, it has been banned from many schools across the United States. He was also disliked for being himself. Due to the topics of his novels, many people thought of him as a young, hipster-type person. However, he became famous when he was in his 50s, which made him appear to be a father-like person. People also thought that Vonnegut had to answer to everything, which he did not. When people went to see him perform lectures, they became very disenchanted with his appearance, and this is what made Vonnegut stop doing lectures. The band, Jefferson Airplane, wanted him to write songs for them, but it didn't work out when they found out that Vonnegut wasn't like how he portrayed himself in his writings. Kurt Vonnegut was even a critic of his own writings. He gave Breakfast of Champions a C, Welcome to the Monkey House a B-, and he gave Slaughterhouse-Five an A+. Kurt Vonnegut will be remembered for centuries for his risky fiction that helped the world say goodbye to Blue Mondays.